If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
Well, it's March 16th, 2022, and I got up bright and early to attend the 8:30 a.m. status hearing for Paul and Ruben Flores in Department 5 in the San Luis Obispo County Court. As usual, court was not broadcasting, so I did verify they were on the court calendar and scheduled to appear. Finally, it said that it had started, but nothing was broadcasting. I kept checking back at 9:12 a.m., 9:24 a.m., 9:35, all the way up to 10:47, and still nothing. Since it was only a status hearing, and the change of venue motion had just been filed, maybe they actually canceled the hearing, or maybe they just didn't broadcast it. I checked the local news for the following days, and there was no update from them either. The next scheduled hearing is on March 30th, 2022. That will be an important one. That is when the judge will listen to the motion for change of venue. I'll be sure to update you. Since this ended up being not much of an update, I decided to add Paul and Ruben's recorded depositions from back in 1997 for the civil suit. This was the year after Kristin disappeared. You can see their mannerisms, and in my opinion, their arrogance, etc., and there may be some clues in these interviews. Of course, Paul doesn't give much insight because he continually pleads the fifth, but it's worth watching. Although this is nothing new, possibly these depositions done with the smart attorney James Murphy will have some good reminders for most of us and maybe new information to some of us. I'm truly hoping that my coverage may assist common people with extraordinary sleuth skills to help solve the case that's happening more and more. As a local, I have access to places, word on the street, etc. For those not from here, there are details not commonly known that we know here locally. I'll try many things to help find Kristin. The courts are dealing with Ruben and Paul. Thank the Lord above that they are both finally being criminally charged. Don't forget that what's in the dark always comes to the light eventually. Here is some context to this clip regarding Ruben and his deposition. It's a very small clip. The whole deposition was over 25 minutes long. The deposition took place on November 14th, 1997 at 9:12 a.m. at a location in San Luis Obispo. Attorney Greg Coates was present representing Ruben Flores as his homeowner's insurance attorney, actually, from Farmers Insurance. Ruben was sworn in. They talked about some things like him being born in Compton, California. He lived in Southern California prior to moving to Arroyo Grande. The podcast covers why they supposedly moved. The homeowner's lawsuit was regarding Paul beating up a schoolmate very badly, hospitalizing the student over something very small. The podcast covers this in great detail, including statements from parents, etc., and it clearly appears Paul has been troubled ever since he was a very young man in elementary school. He was aggressive and violent and could care less about consequences. I guess that worked for him for a while.
Did your son indicate to you that he had kicked a person in the head in that altercation?
He had kicked one. I don't know what he kicked him at. Well, one boy was holding him, and he was trying to get away. He's doing everything he can to try to get away, and one kid got hurt.
All right, and do you know if the kid that got hurt was hospitalized as a result
I don't.
of injuries? Do you know the amount of the medical bills that were paid on behalf of the kid that got injured?
No, I don't.
Do you know the name of the kid who got injured?
No, I don't.
Do you know if a lawsuit was filed against your son?
No, I don't know.
Did your son, when we were talking about this, you and I were talking about this subject generally, I may have incorrectly formulated the idea that there might have been more than one incident in which your son was involved with some accusation.
Apparently, there's been many accusations over the years, even though, in my opinion, Ruben is straight up lying in these statements. Paul's sister also went to Cal Poly, Ermelinda MacArthur. She was married in August of '96 at the Gazebo in Shell Beach, California. Her husband is Brett MacArthur, who's a 5th grade science teacher in Washington State, where they have lived for a while. I do believe she's still married to him, although there's misinformation online claiming she has ex-husbands. I believe that's false information, but of course, I'm not 100% sure. I found many of the questions the attorney asked very intriguing. I'm curious as to the importance, but good attorneys like James Murphy know what they're doing. The deposition for Ruben was regarding his son being sued, not Ruben. Ruben was so sassy and very difficult throughout regarding the homeowner's insurance settlement and the fight that Paul was in Torrance. It seemed very strange to me that Ruben pretended to be so clueless. Ruben claims that 3 people jumped on Paul, so he fought back, and Ruben denied knowledge of the extent of the boy's injuries, possibly setting the stage for Paul's violent tendencies. At that time in November '97, Susan had filed for divorce from Ruben. The divorce was still going through the court process at the time. Both the Floreses were renting rooms in their homes to renters. Susan had a female renter, and Ruben had 3 men renting rooms from him. Ruben hesitated giving the full names, and he wanted to be reassured that the names of his renters would not cause them to be harassed. Mr. Murphy reassured Ruben they would not be harassed. Before we move on to Paul, my research has revealed clarification regarding Paul's sister, Ermelinda. She's done a very good job at staying under the radar. For the most part, anyway. It looks like she does actually have some ex-husbands. So that original information I saw was true. Here is some of the legal information regarding her divorce from Brett back in 2004. It mentions they had no kids, and the information is refreshed 3 hours prior to when I found the information, which is pretty trippy. It just lists miscellaneous filings, nothing really important. Divorce takes a long time and a lot of paperwork. I wonder what she knows. Possibly nothing. But what I do know is the authorities include her in the search warrants over the years, even though she's all the way in Washington, including her tech, messages, and so on. I also wonder what her ex-husband Brett might know. So Paul's deposition was the same day, November 14th of 1997. Just later in the day, you can see the timestamp. It started at 11:04. These are some clips a little farther in. Paul claimed the 5th again throughout the entire time. And after a while, Murphy got fed up with Paul and his attorney. Remember, these are civil attorneys, not criminal attorneys. But to me, it really goes to show what a weasel Paul is, in my opinion.
You reported your Nissan truck stolen in San Diego recently. Is that correct?
On advice of my attorney, I refused to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
The record should reflect that when I asked that question, Mr. Delamotte placed his finger upon the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with the Fifth Amendment invocation, and the witness read it into the record. I think probably the best way to do this, Mr. Delamotte, I'm not trying to be disrespectful of your position. I know of you and your reputation in our legal community. Nonetheless, I believe that the position that you are taking is clearly erroneous. I believe that it is a violation of the rules of civil proceedings. I know that you have done some civil work, but your instruction to your client to refuse to answer even the most simple and basic question, including questions that have absolutely no tendency in fact or law to incriminate him, is, I believe, misplaced. Nonetheless, if it is your position that Mr. Flores is not going to answer questions about his employment, his matriculation into Cal Poly, who his friends are, his relationship with his family members, things that occurred in his life prior to the date of the disappearance of Kristin Smart, vehicles that were available to him to use, things of that sort. Perhaps I can cut to the chase and simply make a record as to the types of questions that I would be asked, and we can just have the blanket invocation. I get your position on that on the record, so when I go to a reviewing court, I have a clear and fair record.
As I indicated, he plans to answer that he will invoke the Fifth Amendment on all your questions. If you have questions to direct to my client, go ahead and ask questions. Save the speeches for later. Just ask the question.
Okay, well, Mr. Delamont, it's not a speech. It's a civil proceeding.
If you're not going to ask questions, we'll discontinue the deposition and leave. If you're here to take a deposition, if you want to ask a question, go ahead.
I'm going to make a record of my position in this case, Mr. Delamont.
You can make the record some other time. Ask the questions. That's what a deposition is for. Not to make a speech. You can make a speech to the court. You can do it in writing. You can do it orally. Ask the questions. We're here to answer the questions. We're required to do so. Ask the questions or we'll leave.
All right, I'm going to make my record here. I've been advised that he's not going to answer the questions, so let's start asking the questions. Did you report your 85 Nissan truck stolen in San Diego recently?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
In May of '96, were you a student at Cal Poly?
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Please provide me with the employment positions that you have held since you started high school.
On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Are you? I think that I have made a sufficient record that the witness is not going to answer any questions in connection with anything other than his name. I have been advised by Mr. Delamont at the start of the deposition that the witness would not be answering any questions other than his name. The witness, on advice of counsel, is refusing to answer any and all questions. I have approximately 1,000 additional questions, but having had no success in finding out whether or not he cooked hamburgers at Garland's, I'm going to cease the questioning. I believe I've made a sufficient record to go to a court and seek appropriate relief. I want the record clear that I will be seeking sanctions from Mr. Delamont, from his law firm, and from Mr. Flores as a result of what I believe to be a bad faith presentation of this witness and a wrongful assertion of the Fifth Amendment. At this time, I would propose the following stipulation: that the court reporter will prepare the original deposition and forward it to either Mr. Delamont or Mr. Coates. To Mr. Delamont. Mr. Delamont will provide the deposition transcript to Mr. Flores. Mr. Flores will have an opportunity to review his deposition, make any changes. That at the conclusion of the process of review of the deposition, Mr. Flores will be given an opportunity to make any changes he wishes to make. My office will be advised of the changes within 30 days of the making of those changes. That in the event the witness does not sign the deposition transcript under penalty of perjury, a copy, an unsigned copy, could be used with the same force and effect as a signed copy. That the reporter would be relieved of her duties under the code. Do I have a stipulation?
So agreed.
I think that concludes the deposition. I agree to that.
We are going off record now at
2022. Can we go back on record? Mr. Delamont, may I just have one more second of your time so I can complete the record? Mr. Delamont has before him a file of materials which I have no idea whether or not Mr. Flores did or did not review those documents. I simply want the record to reflect that he does have a file here. The only document that I saw Mr. Flores look at in my presence was the admonition which is attached. Thank you.
Anything to say?
This time, the smarts are still pointing the finger at you. Do you have anything that you want to say that you think the public should understand about your position and why you haven't spoken out?
They're questioning and confront him about his injuries.
How do we know that everything that you've told us so far isn't really the truth? How do we know now that you lied for us?
Well, that wasn't important though.
Sure is. That's important.
Flores now tells investigators that he sustained the injuries when he hit his eye on his steering wheel while installing a car stereo. One aspect of Flores' story that doesn't change is the account of his last moments with Kristin.
I walked with her to where the driveway was, and I went up to my dorm. This is the walkway goes that way towards my dorm, and then she started walking that way.
Investigators have their doubts. They offer Flores a lie detector test, but he refuses. Still, it's not enough for investigators to charge Flores with any crime.
I'm adding additional miscellaneous clips here as I wrap up my thoughts. First, I'd like to mention that I was struck by Paul's attorney, Mr. Delamont. And to quote the attorney, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Delamont's bad faith assertion. For whatever reason, it's often brought up Paul's high school job at Garland's, the hamburger place. And by the way, I do have an episode where I covered Garland's. I do know female coworkers had complained about his sexual undertones and some of his behavior along those lines. I'm not sure if that's the significance of why Garland's is always mentioned, but I found that interesting. I'm sure by now you've noticed Paul's stutter, which he's had all along. It seems when he gets under pressure, the stutter gets worse. He also actually admitted to the police in that one interview about lying regarding his black eye, scratches, etc. And then later says, but it wasn't important. So I guess Paul decides what's important and whether he thinks it's important enough to tell the truth or not. Those appear to be his standards, according to his own word.
A affiliate in Los Angeles caught Paul Flores leaving his home in San Pedro this morning. It did not appear any search was taking place there. The sheriff's office says the only search being done was at the property in Arroyo Grande. 44-year-old Flores is currently out on bail. He was arrested last month in Southern California on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. The sheriff's office says that arrest was a result of search warrants that were served last year in connection with the case.
Now that I myself have been to the scene of the dorms and Kristin's final walk, I have a better understanding, and I envision it in my head when Paul says, the walkways went that way, hers went that way. And you can see the setup of the dorms and Kristin's final walk on one of the episodes we've done regarding her case. I've always had my doubts about Paul's story, walking her back to the dorm or not. And once I visited, it was cemented. In our video, I go into detail why I think he's lying and why what he says is BS. You also note he refused a lie detector test. That is mentioned in the coverage shown earlier here. Now you are able to see his mannerisms if you've not seen Paul in a video before now. You can see how nervous he seems to be, in my opinion. I'm just wondering what you guys think. You can see how his voice is not firm or committal, how he stutters, how his eyes are darting around, his hand movements. You can better understand now with the descriptions I provided and hearing it from his own mouth. I'm anxious to see, for those of you who have never seen him in a video, what your thoughts are. There's not a whole lot of coverage out there regarding Paul or his family. And all things considered for the size of this case, that's surprising. Here's the maps that I used to do Kristin's final walk and get a better look at the dorms over there and the setup and so forth. I highly encourage you to watch that episode. Even people who attended Cal Poly were as surprised as I was that that's the exact route that she took that evening. I found this sketched map interesting of Susan's yard and where they tried to search, where they were able to dig, where they were not. Certainly more areas were not searched than were. I also go into that detail in the episode where we do Kristin's final walk. It's crazy to think that blonde-haired Paul, looking so innocent, has apparently turned out to be such a monster, in my opinion, and many other people's opinion. We hope that the court hearing coming up in April will finally provide more answers and justice for everybody involved, especially Kristin's family. And ultimately, most importantly, we need to find where she is, where she remains now, so that her family can provide a proper burial, so they can have a commemorative place for her, and they can have the peace knowing that she's just not out there somewhere, anywhere, just lying there. Paul Flores has lived his life under a cloud of suspicion. I wonder if he would have been more transparent way back when he could possibly already be out of prison. Instead, he chose to keep his whole family under this dark cloud of suspicion, having the community and the family searching and wondering and trying to find answers. These are the notebooks the Smart family kept over the years, writing down anything and everything, whether it seemed significant at the time or not, related to phone calls, interviews, and anything else for Kristin. Well, there's Ruben in the backseat of the cop car, just like his son was. Imagine being this old and having to deal with all that. In my opinion, Paul's entire family has made horrible choices related to this case and continue to make horrible choices. To me, the Smart family is the polar opposite by trying to lead a good example and being good people. As many of you know, I grew up in Napa, and at the time, Kristin's father was a principal in the area. He had to spend his time looking in ditches and dumpsters and things for his missing daughter. Whenever I see him or the family, my heart just breaks for them. I hope that peace can be found and that Kristin herself is found as well. Justice for Kristin.
If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just be love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for watching.
Bring my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I like to fix, but I still